whether it's $10,000, $100,000, or even more, that money is literally rotting away, and they should either be in gold, silver, or in businesses or real estate or something that is not losing its value overnight. I don't know if you fully agree with that, but that's my mindset.
Well, of course, I fully agree with that. And, here's a good example of that. What's happening in Russia, which I don't want to get too far into, but imagine if you were a Russian citizen and your money was in the Russian banks and you were holding Russian rubles. Well, the ruble lost 30% of its value this week, 20% last week. That means you've taken a 50% haircut of all the money you had in your banking account in less than 2 weeks because of a governmental issue that you have no control over. The value of money predicated on only paper is subject to wild volatility and changes if the sustaining entities don't do a good job of controlling it. And, we're just lucky in the United States that the Federal Reserve has better control over monetary policy, but we're losing value in the United States rapidly, but it's spread out over time to where the impact isn't quite as exacerbated. But yeah, I mean, that ruble is a perfect example of the flaw with carrying unbacked money.
That makes sense. Hey, Fred, it's good to see you again, buddy. How are you?
Oh, it's good to see you.
Fred Dashevsky, U.S. Coin Capital. I've been following him for so long. And the other day, it's just been so busy. And so I'm like, okay, I got to get Fred back on. And the other day it popped up because I saw somebody posting bullion bars again. And people out there are bragging about silver bullion bars. And I'm like, God, get into the numismatics. And then people ask me again, they're like, oh, well, I have tons of bullion. And I'm like, it's not bad. I mean, it's still silver, but there's a reason I'm in numismatics. Is I don't really feel like the government coming and confiscating.
I don't blame you. Well, I look at the worlds of numismatics and gold and silver bullion, again, just to define that so people recognize what we're talking about. If you have a bar of silver or any round silver, gold, whatever, that has no monetary status, it was just something that was made intrinsically out of the metal, we call that bullion. There basically are a couple ways to look at it. I agree with your outlying premise, which is certainly it's better to have some physical form of wealth like that than paper money. So, any form of silver that people have, if they happen to have bars and bullion, that's, better than money in forms of paper. But the advantages of owning a coin that's made of silver are twofold. First, the bullion market is federally regulated, and that means that the government owns that market to where they can impart regulations. So what stands right now is, for example, the fact that, let's say you sold me a bar of gold. Well, I am now required by federal law to file what they call a 1099-B with your name, social security number, and information. All that private info goes to IRS, and it reports as income. So you have to justify your cost basis. Otherwise, the amount that you got from the check I wrote to you for the sale of that bullion looks like income. And of course, if you don't report it, now there is this discrepancy between what I've sent the IRS as far as information about what you've done and what you've reported. Now there's a big problem because now that's violation of federal law. The other thing is that they're forcing me as a dealer to follow the AML rules, the anti-money laundering rules, as if I'm supposed to know that if you bought bullion from me or sold it to me, that the purchase of that came from legitimate money sources. If it turns out that was not the case and I participated by allowing you to sell me that bullion, I'm now subject to regulations because I have helped in money laundering. So for these reasons, I try to stay away from the bullion market. Also, if it turns out the government should decide, and I don't think they would in the modern era, but there's nothing to stop them from doing this, if they should decide to outlaw the public's ownership of gold or silver, that is limited to the bullion market. They cannot do that with actual coins minted by the U.S. Treasury. And I look at the advantage of not only the regulatory issues, but think about this too. If you own silver coins, like a dime, quarter, half dollar, silver dollar, they haven't made silver dollars since 1935. They haven't minted a silver dime, quarter, or half dollar since 1964. And they can never, ever make another one. So you have a supply of that market that is already absolutely locked down. And since it could never increase, not only will the value of those types of silver coins go up as the underlying metal price should grow, but also the value they carry as a coin in that shape and form also can increase. And as an example of this, 20 years ago, a silver dollar used to sell for the same premium over its melt content that dimes and quarters and half dollars did. But in today's world, if you were to buy the worst quality, worn out, cull they call it, worn silver dollar, they cost about 100% over the amount of metal in them. 100%. So the premiums on them have grown, but people used to be able to buy them for 10 or 15% over metal content, just like in today's world, dimes and quarters still sell for that small premium. As of this week, by the way, the half dollars went up again a little bit, separating themselves slightly from the quarters and dimes, becoming a little bit more valuable because there is a smaller number of half dollars. So anybody who's accumulated half dollars has actually been seeing a little bit of an extra benefit besides the upward movement we've seen recently in silver prices.
I was going to say we had a bit of a jump this week in gold and silver, didn't we?
We sure did. I mean, a lot of this is inflationary driven because the reality of what's been happening in the economy is becoming clearer and clearer. I've always looked at this I look at the source of inflation first, which is I watch the money increasing supply as my indicator that we have a real big problem. And because of the pandemic we've experienced the past 2 years, the Fed has been what they call been accommodative, which is a nice way of saying that they've made money really cheap and readily available, at near zero interest rates. And what that's done, for example, is it allowed a lot of the companies in America to borrow money for almost zero interest and then use that money to buy their own stock back. Mm-hmm. So they drove up the values of their stocks dramatically without the companies actually making any more profit or becoming more valuable for fundamental reasons. The stock value went up, which is great if you're the CEO of that company because your bonuses are based upon the stock price. So you guys, as CEOs of these large corporations, are making a fortune, but the valuation of your company has been
it's not a real growth. It's a veil. It's not legit. The company didn't actually do better per se, right?
That's exactly right. And therein lies the problem. So now the Fed is not going to be as accommodative anymore because it overdid this accommodative nonsense for so long and put so much money into the economy at such cheap levels for so long, printed all of this money to stave off this slowdown of the pandemic, that now we're getting a backwash. Well, now the companies are facing a real kind of a reality check where people are saying, well, with this now higher stock that you drove your stock price to by buying it yourself, where is the valuation of your company? Is it really close to what it should be, or is it really overstated? And as companies are reporting their earnings, people are now looking back at fundamentals and saying, well, what's the company really worth? Did they make any more profit? Is this justifiable that they're selling for 70 times what they're earning this year? And a lot of these companies are beginning to experience big drops in stock prices as the Fed has reversed its accommodative process and now is saying, not only are we not going to make money cheap and readily available, we're going to slow down our impetus, our pushing capital into the market, and we're going to start raising interest rates, which is going to reverse the process. So watch how the stock market reacts now. I assure you it's going to be a lot more volatile going forward.
So I've heard that they can raise the rate by as much as a point in March. Do you actually think it goes up that much, or do you think that they try to finagle something?
Yeah, I think a quarter point is going to be the choice that the Fed makes. Here's the problem. When trying to reverse this accommodative process, the Fed now has to somehow figure out how do we raise interest rates enough to beat back the inflationary dragon we've created. And again, the Fed has $9 trillion on its balance sheet from all the debt it's bought. It's been pumping money into the economy at $120 billion a month for the past 2 years. It has not stopped, by the way, still has not ended that, which it has to before it starts really raising rates. Now that it's going to start raising rates, how do we go moving forward without creating a problem where they raise rates so quickly or so strongly that they choke the economy? So the Fed has to find this perfect balance. And I've said it's like like you're in a prop airplane and you got a 50-mile-an-hour crosswind and you're trying to softly land this thing on the tarmac. I mean, it is a tricky process. And unfortunately, for the Fed to make this perfect soft landing, they have to raise rates just enough to fight off inflation, but not too much to create, a recessionary economy. And unfortunately, the Fed has a horrible, horrible history of managing these kinds of difficult situations. They don't do it well.
How do you take a bunch of seemingly smart people? How do you take a bunch of seemingly smart people and not be able to figure out it? It's almost like, and I'm just kind of riffing on this. You have companies who are being fraudulent because they're investing money they're investing money to show growth that really isn't there. But then their wrongdoing is now affecting a public with the interest rate going up, and the public didn't do anything wrong technically. They're just trying to get on with their lives. But now the public, I feel like, is going to get slapped across the face, whereas the company that has billions of dollars in their coffers, like they're really, I mean, yeah, they'll take a couple hits, but their executives are still making money. The company's still making money. The board's still making money. Is there a solution to this? Is there a way to fix this where the public doesn't get slapped across the face, lose jobs, employment goes down, et cetera, while the company's still, making their dividends?
Well, if they worked on reality, so let's say valuations were based on fundamentals. That is, you own a company, and let's say you are more profitable than last year. You increased the amount of production. Your manufacturing has gone up. You literally made more money. Well, there, accordingly, your stock value going up makes perfect sense. So the key to keeping it from hurting the public is to stop manipulating markets artificially. And this using cheap money and interest rates to drive economic environments is fundamentally a flaw. And I've argued for the past several years, the biggest concern I had about what was going to happen to the public was the fact that the Federal Reserve had become a huge power player, and it was such a big driver that most of the economic numbers were not based on that reality of that company really making more and producing more and therefore showing a higher yield and profit. It was because we were allowing manipulation of the markets because the Fed was trying to infiltrate the economy because it had gotten itself in a corner when the pandemic kicked in and the economy slowed down and interest rates were already really low because the Fed had been fighting off recessionary problems for years and years before this all started, and now found itself in a position where the only choice it had left was accommodative easing and making money readily available. So it was inevitable that these things were going to happen. Where the problem comes in is if the public doesn't recognize what is creating this upward movement in their stock prices. Do they understand that it's happening because, one, there's real reality of growth and economic activity that's really translating into a higher value for that company? Or are we merely seeing a higher stock price because, the interior mechanisms allowed the company to buy their own stock and drive it up through the roof, even though the company didn't make any more profit? Therein lies the problem. So I think it comes down to, you just need to recognize that you can't count on artificial numbers to sustain themselves for very long. You might be able to make some money in the short term. The past couple of years have been great for those people that have been in a lot of the stock markets. But now the entire environment has changed. We've done a complete reversal. Look at what's happened since the first of the year on the Dow almost every day. It is either up 500 points, down 500 points. I mean, the volatility is enormous because we're so far removed from reality now that one of two things is going to happen. People are going to wake up and look at that company and say, valued at 80 or 90 times its earnings is just insane. And now they come out with an earnings report and says, well, here are our actual numbers. And people say, well, I think we need to revalue our thinking here. Maybe that stock needs to come down quite a bit. And I think that's going to be the case going forward. So if I were a stock investor, I would prepare myself going forward now, because the Fed has changed its policy and interest rates are now going to be going up and no longer going to be as accommodative. We would expect now that the stocks are going to have a lot more trouble showing gains unless they really prove that they've actually made more money.
Yeah, I just realized this. I haven't been looking, but the Dow is up 600 today.
And it was down 500 yesterday,
Have we ever? I don't know because I wasn't studying this a long time ago, but I don't ever remember hearing about swings like this before. Is this something new now in this new era of chaos in the last couple of years?
It's much more dramatic now because the numbers are so much bigger. The valuations are so far ahead of what they were. And we have been through volatile times before in stocks, but the numbers right now are much bigger than ever before, just like the size of the Fed's balance sheet. We've never had a Fed with a $9 trillion balance sheet. We've never had a government that was $31 trillion in debt. We never had a situation where the deficit spending was 119% of the GDP on a ratio basis. It's a little bit nuts at this point. And the amount of money in circulation has grown 40% in 2 years. That is something the United States has never experienced. Never in the history of the United States have we ever seen such a rapid expansion of merely the amount of money that exists. And these things will have an impact. Some of it we're beginning to see. And this is what's interesting is that, first you print the money, then it filters its way through the economy. And then as an end result, prices start to go up, which forces wages to go higher because people start complaining they can't make ends meet. So they go to their employer and say, hey, I need to earn more money because my basket of food is costing me more. My health insurance, my energy costs, my car, everything is going up in price. And that all filters. And this is what people begin to see. But by the time people see price increases, that's sort of an after effect of the creation of the money that was the beginning fundamental problem, which is where I really have become concerned and why I have been encouraging people, don't count on paper money. Don't be a Russian ruble investor and leave all your wealth in paper that's so subject to change. Make sure that you diversify and at least something you're putting away is physical, tangible. And I love the American gold and silver coins. I love that constitutional money.
I see that they started minting again, and they're putting a little notch in the coin. What does that mean?
A notch in the coin?
Have you seen the new what they have a name for them? There's a new, it's the silver dollar, I believe, and there's a on the outside where the ridges are. There's a notch in the bottom where there's one less ridge, so they say that they can identify it. Have you heard about this?
You know what? I have not.
I'll have to send it over to you.
Okay.
I'll send it over to you after the show. I'm really curious your take on it because they physically changed it and they're saying it's for identification.
Okay. I'll have to dig into that and find out what they're attempting to do. I'm not really sure why they would find it beneficial to identify a modern coin.
I know.
I mean, obviously, they're not made out of gold and silver, so I mean, there's no difference between a quarter minted today or a quarter minted in 1970. So I'm not really sure, unless there's something else surreptitious going on, which is always a possibility. So
no, everything's perfect, Fred. Everything's going great out there.
Yeah. We're from the government. We're here to help you.
So on top of that, yeah, you got to obviously talk about the international problem. Do you think, have you studied or do you know a lot about the SWIFT system and now like Russia's coming off of that, the Fed, I believe, and this is like a package question because there's no way to get around it, and the fact that they're talking about pulling out a digital currency, a CBDC, right, that they want to control at the Fed level. But then we have the SWIFT system. Russia's saying, hey, we don't even need to be on that system anymore. We're going to do our own thing. This feels very internationally world-changing no matter which direction we go.
Well, I think what's happening is that we're weaponizing monetary policy. So, in other words, we want to fight back an aggressor. All right, Putin is now being an aggressor in Russia, and we don't like what he's doing. So what we don't want to do is a war where we physically send our troops and put our men at risk, right, men and women. Instead, we're going to fight them economically. So we start with sanctions. We start with trying to limit their ability to use the banking system. So things like, locking Russia out of SWIFT is one effort to try to curtail their ability to conduct global commerce. If we can lock them out of the ease of process of moving money between various currencies, we effectively are forcing them to utilize their own currency, which is, of course, being seriously devalued. But unfortunately, I think Putin was aware that we would probably play that card. So what he began to do was to do alternative things to cover his own ass, which was accumulate gold and utilize his oil production. Now, for example, imagine he is producing oil at such a cheap rate that he wants to make you an ally and says, well, if the West won't play ball with us and they will lock us out of easy transactions with currencies, I can gather my own group of people who will work with me, and I can create a very strong incentive by saying, I'll tell you what, I'll sell you oil for much less than the market value if you will allow currency exchanges between us and your country. So Putin has created a situation where he can try to fight back what he thought would be the United States or the West's response to his invading in the Ukraine. And it's become very interesting that we're playing a new game where we're weaponizing monetary policy as a method of fighting off having to put boots on the ground, which I certainly prefer that. I mean, I definitely don't want to see American troops put at risk to fight a war of an invading army going into a sovereign nation. But it's very interesting that a lot of it comes down to none of this would even exist if everyone were operating on sound money principles. You wouldn't have these manipulations.
Back to that money. Sound money? What?
Yeah. It's such a fundamental issue that, when you allow the nonsense to begin at the start, well, then everything that comes after it is going to continue to happen. If you lock it down, nip it in the bud, as they say, well, then, none of this would be possible. But we live in that world. We live in a monetary world. So I think it's very interesting. I do want to say, and I've said this before, but these geopolitical events, like what's happening in Russia, these are temporary. And I don't think that people should be either overly concerned or overly excited by short-term things that are happening because of it. For example, gold has gone up a little bit and silver's gone up a little bit in this past week or so. A lot of that because of the short-term knee-jerk reactions to, Europeans are pulling out of their stocks and out of Russia, of course, and maybe they're buying U.S. stocks because it looks now like a safe haven. And people are pouring into gold because they're worried about what's happening in Russia. I think people should maintain that longer-term thought process when it comes to acquiring gold and silver coins and consider that the inflationary problem is the real issue. It existed before this Russian situation happened. The Russian situation could fade away in a week or 5 years from now. This may turn out to be like one of these Iraqi wars where we're still talking about it. Who knows? I hope it's the former. But if it turns out it's the latter, the inflationary problem is not going away.
Right.
And when you get a geopolitical situation like this, it tends to make people more aware than they were a couple of weeks earlier of how quickly things can change. In that sense, I think it's good. It's a bit of an awakening of people to say, hey, maybe we ought to be paying attention, but don't overly concern yourself with the short-term volatility that we're seeing right now. Just recognize that in the U.S., the inflationary pressures are not going away. Powell said this morning as chairman of the Federal Reserve, he's now saying, and these are his quotes, inflation is too high.
Okay, I need to
you remember what he said last year? Last year it was inflation is not a problem and it's going to go away.
I need to ask a Ron Paul question because okay.
Love those.
Fred, can we get to a point? $9 trillion on the balance sheet.
Yep.
Is there a point? I think I've asked this before, but it becomes more insane by the day. Is there a point where we could just bankrupt said Fed and be done with this thing and actually go back to America and the founding and the Constitution where there is real sound money? Like, is it? Do you know what I mean? Like, at this point, it's so out of control. That money is not going to be paid back. We're not paying it back. It's got to come from somewhere. But, like, I don't want a great reset. But can we push a button and make this thing disappear?
Well, here's the thing. Now, the Fed's debt that it holds on its balance sheet is money that it actually has purchased from the U.S. government. So
Right.
the U.S. government has had access to that capital to be able to spend and put into the economy and put it to work. The Fed will now get interest on all these debt instruments it's accumulated. The problem with the Fed balance sheet at $9 trillion is that the Fed is competing with the world for current debt. So, for example, where we are right now is the U.S. government is still deficit spending, right? They're still spending money they don't have, which means that they still every week have to have another bond auction and sell more of these same kind of debt instruments that the Fed has. But if the Fed is the only entity that can afford to buy the debt from the government, the world will begin to question the government's ability to repay its loan obligations. And if that confidence is eroded, there is going to be a huge problem. I mean, a lot of what we do in the world today is really more psychological than reality. You know, it's based on a perception. Like, how do you feel about the value of the dollar? How concerned are you about inflation? If you, as an American citizen, are losing confidence in your government's ability to repay its debt, how likely are you to loan them money at today's levels to buy new debt? But the government has to keep selling this debt every day because it's still deficit spending. So the fact that the Fed has $9 trillion on its balance sheet is extremely significant, not because that debt has to be repaid, but because if they continue to be the only buyer of debt around the world from the US, the world is going to lose confidence in the government's ability. And if we can't continue to sell debt, the government's going to have a massive problem. It won't have enough capital to pay off interest. And, you know, the interest on the debt right now, on the debt the U.S. government carries, is the second largest item of its entire government budget. The first thing we spend money on, Department of Defense. That everything military. All that combined, the next item in the budget is interest payments on the current debt. So to remove all that would be a fundamental change. And the only way that's going to happen is if Congress decides that they no longer want to have a Federal Reserve or a central bank operating under the auspices of the U.S. government to try to maintain economic stability and maintain full employment, which is the Fed's charter. I mean, they've done a horrible job of doing those two things. You would think that Congress at some point might say, you know, could we do better without them? I think the answer is certainly yes. I think if we had a central bank owned by the public, as opposed to a private group of international bankers, that would be a far better system for all of us. But
ooh, that's an interesting idea, like a credit union at the top.
Sure, you know, a publicly owned central bank. So I've never had a problem fundamentally with the idea of a central bank, a loaner of last resort, somebody to support the market in uncertain times, to be able to do these expansions and a little bit of elasticity in the currency from time to time. Hey, that's okay. You know, we can deal with that. The fact that it's owned by private people is what's most troubling. You know, if we owned that central bank as a country, we would all benefit from it instead of, you know, paying it to a private group of bankers. I don't know that there's any political gumption amongst politicians to be able to accept the notion you're putting out that we should end the Fed. I just don't think that they have the guts, the political, you know, power to stand up to battle that battle. I wish it were true.
Maybe they're making too much money off of it.
Well, yeah, there could be those underlying issues that, you know, we don't know about, but whether they're benefiting financially, oh boy, that's a whole other kind of a fish. I just don't think that they have the political power. And again, it would require two things. It would require, you know, this means Congress actually understands this, right? They have to get it first. They have to see why there's a problem. Then they have to be willing to take the political stand and say, yeah, we don't think this is right and we want to change this, because boy, that would take, you know, it's kind of like when they used to talk about Social Security as the third rail of politics. You never want to tell a retiring public that you're not going to get your Social Security checks because the government's bankrupt and we're going to have to default on that obligation. You don't want to do that because it's political suicide. You know, in the same sense, I don't think there are politicians, except for guys like Ron Paul, you know, who have that gumption to stand up and say, we believe that this Federal Reserve System is so flawed that it should end. And I think even Ron Paul kind of, I won't say gave up, but he realized that he was getting nowhere with end the Fed. So he shifted to, well, let's just audit the damn thing. Can we at least do that? And even that was a battle.
Yeah, I remember the end the Fed thing, and as I studied it more, I'm like, I don't think you can end it over. Even if you got rid of it, you would have to transition it out of existence. You can't just end it. That'd be too much of a shock. But yeah, the audit thing, or at least do something to make them responsible for, what they have going on, and that might be the answer. Are you seeing massive amounts of movement? With you must be slammed, by the way, as a business right now.
It's nuts. I mean, it's absolutely nuts. The volume of business that we're doing, it just keeps growing and growing, it's very good. And I'm glad to see it, because it means people are beginning to recognize that there's an issue that they have to address. I think the best case scenario would be if America had a central bank, even if it were privately owned, that wasn't such a big participant in the overall state of the economy. If they were just a minor player behind the scenes, this wouldn't be so problematic. But when they become the biggest monster and they control so much of the economic environment, we become so reliant on them to do all of this properly. Therein lies the problem. And I think the public should not trust this Federal Reserve System to do what its charter suggests, which is stabilize the value of money and maintain full employment. I don't believe they can do this. And I don't believe that they can do this soft landing. I mean, we'll find out in months to come as you and I continue to talk whatever happened. But I don't believe that the Fed can manage this airplane landing on the tarmac perfectly. I just think it's going to be problematic. So I am concerned about that. And I think people should look at what happens in various parts of the world when the central banks of those countries lose control. It gets ugly very quickly. So for people listening to this, the reality is, look, we have this flaw in paper money in America. It's probably not going to change in our lifetime. As much as I would love to see it happen, realistically, again, I've been at this for 38 years. And I remember when Andy and I used to say, maybe we could hit critical mass. Maybe guys like Ron Paul, we could just get so many people together and have an uprising and take control back of the currency of the country. Over the years, we began to realize that was just less and less likely to really ever happen. So as a result, we just decided, well, the best thing you can do is educate people about, hey, there is a problem, but at least you can do something about it personally. For your own wealth and protection, buy physical gold and silver coins, put them away, and at least you'll balance out this loss in paper money. And I think that's the best that we can hope for going forward.
So you're seeing a massive rise of people doing that, for diving into it. Is your day now? Is your day more the people who've been in this world and continue to pile on, or do you feel like it's more now you're getting newbies in that are needing to be educated more on? Like, where is your market now?
It's interesting. I'd say it's a combination of both. A lot of new people coming into the market, more than I've seen in any time I can remember in such a compressed period of time. But a lot of people who've been around the block for a while have also seen the benefit of what they've done in years past and are beginning again to pile on. I think the other thing that's happening is, as I mentioned earlier, it's an unfortunate thing that people don't react to inflation at the creation point, that point at which I see the money supply growing. That's why 2 years ago I began to raise the alarm bells and saying, hey, folks, wake up. We have a big problem here. We are printing an incredibly large amount of money. This is going to end badly with higher prices, higher wages, inflation pressures. But nobody really saw it then until now. But now it's almost impossible. I mean, on an anecdotal basis, you could pretty much stop anybody on the street, an average conversation with people. It's hard not to see somebody mention, hey, the cost of this went up and the cost of that went up. And boy, I can't believe how much I had to pay for X, Y, and Z. People are seeing this firsthand and they're responding to it. And they're waking up to say, well, wait a minute, what do I do about that? I can't sustain a lifestyle if my costs are going to keep going up, if somehow I'm not adding to my benefit, somewhere. And that's, I think, what's driving a lot of people to look into gold and silver coins.
Are you also now getting more on my end, and I'm doing it myself, but in my world, I put gold, silver first, but then I put a nice chunk of discretionary income into the things like the Bitcoin and other stuff. Are you seeing other people now also dive into it just from a standpoint of hedging against inflation?
Yeah, it comes up often. People have mentioned it. Obviously, we've also seen the past month or two how volatile those markets are. So, there is a concern there about the speculative nature of it. And, my point about the cryptos has been basically the same, which is I've been worried about the fact that it's so intangible and so volatile and so uncertain. And I believe that the regulations were going to become a bigger and bigger part of how people will view that. Of course, now the IRS has added on the new tax returns, did you buy or sell any crypto last year? So this regulatory stuff is becoming, a bigger thing. But it is interesting to me. I will put it this way. I don't think people would be looking as much at these alternatives like crypto if there wasn't a problem with the US dollar.
Right.
Why would people have to even think about it except the possibility of making money, which I get. People saying, hey, this is a great opportunity to get into a new whatever, and perhaps it becomes extremely valuable in the future, and I can make a great amount of profit by having been early in the game. I get that. But the fact that a lot of people, even consider these alternatives sort of alludes to the idea that, well, there must be a problem. I mean, if you're happy with your doctor, why would you look for another doctor? You know what I mean? If you're getting good
service, I totally get it, man. That's why I'm in it.
Okay, so if I'm happy with the service I'm getting from, my air conditioner repair guy or my auto mechanic, why would I be looking to anybody else? If an ad shows up for another doctor and I'm happy with mine, I'm not going to pay attention to it. But if I'm really worried that, my guy's not doing a great job, well, suddenly I'm much more interested in looking at other alternatives. And I think the same thing is true about the US dollar. If there weren't a problem with it, a lot less people would be looking at alternatives. So I think it's very interesting that this is sort of a indicator, if you will, of a level of distrust that is beginning to prevail throughout the economy. And I think it's justified.
Your knowledge is trickling down, by the way, because just this morning I had a patient in my office, family, and they found you through the show, and their kids are homeschooled now, and their son, I want to say he's somewhere in that, I want to say 14, 15 area. I could be wrong. I don't recall, but he really smart, like just reading like crazy. And he only had a little bit of money, but he and his dad went to a coin shop and he started diving in, buying some silver coins. And I want to say something great. Like, I think it was a Benjamin Franklin. I want to say it was like a 58, but I don't remember the number exactly. But like he's just diving in, and they're now getting into numismatic coin collecting. Like, but not because it's fun, because they understand the finance piece.
Well, that's great. And look, the more people that understand the nature of money, I think it is almost a conclusion that becomes inevitable that you would have to have an alternative. And I've always suggested that if there were other alternatives that were as viable, like if you could literally store food for 10 or 20 years, yeah, I'd say, hey, buy food instead of paper money. But obviously food spoils, except for some things that you can store, right? Or there are things that are not convenient to be able to try to trade. I know people that collect rare guitars or rare motorcycles or rare saxophones or whatever people are into. I think any of these kinds of things make perfect sense. I think the advantages of coins and numismatic coins is two things. One, it is legal currency of the United States, and because of that, it has certain characteristics that are inevitably beneficial. But most importantly, we have known quantities that are fixed. So I remember one of the advantages of Bitcoin was supposed to be the fact that at some point people said there will be a top number of Bitcoin produced, and once that number is achieved, that'll be it. So imagine that already exists now. Well, it does in silver coins. We haven't minted one of these things since 1964, and again, can never make another one. So the advantage of owning something like that, and the fact that there's already an existing market that's been around for 200 years of people buying and selling and trading these kinds of particular products, that you've got liquidity. You can buy things that are worth $100,000 as a single coin, or $10 million as a single coin, or you could buy a dime for $3. You know what I mean? There's a lot of advantages and incremental accumulation that people can participate in. So it's affordable at every dollar range. And I remember when I first started putting coins away, I was, my early 20s. And, I'd save silver quarters, silver dimes, silver half dollars. And this was back when silver was, $3.50 an ounce. And you look at it now at $25. It's just, it's just an inevitable process. So I'm encouraged by the fact that younger people are becoming aware of this, because a lot of people, even older adults, still don't quite grasp why paper money loses value. You have to really fundamentally understand. And again, people are not going to try to get into economics. And, that's a lot for people to get if they're going to try to study that subject. It's vast. It really is. I've been at it for 38 years. I learn new stuff every day. But the accumulation of information on that subject is extensive. So a lot of people have lives and jobs and families and careers. That's what they should be paying attention to. They shouldn't have to worry about the fundamental value of the money that they're forced to earn because it's in a form they don't get to control. And that's where I think we went off the rails. The decision in 1971 to remove gold and silver as a standard against paper money was the single biggest mistake financially the U.S. government ever made. And we are paying the price for it now because all of this nonsense, this manipulation of stock value, this artificial creation of money, this inflationary issue, up and down movement in the values of prices of things that we have to face, all of it is a result of moving away from that fundamental standard that the Constitution had locked down. The reason the Founding Fathers was so adherent to that principle was because they could foresee the inevitable problem of what would happen if you allowed economics, politicians, or bankers to be able to manipulate money. That was the end game there for them. So they said, we have to stop that from happening so we can worry about everything else. We have enough other problems to deal with. The last thing we want to worry about is the value of money.
Those founders clearly knew there was a problem even before they did that, because there had to be a reason. Well, we know that. There had to be a reason why they were locking that down, because they knew what history was already showing us. And then history came back around again like it always does. And we got bit in 1971. Fred, I'm very hopeful. I'm still holding out hope we go back to a metal standard.
Well, I think it would be great. I think it would be an interesting thing to have happen. The way I look at it, though, is there's two problems as I see that I don't believe will result in us getting there. The first one being that I don't believe that the U.S. government could possibly sustain its activities if we had a lockdown on their ability to just print money to solve every economic problem. I don't think they could do it. I don't think they can manage it.
You would literally have to imprison the bankers to do it.
Well, sure. And then how would Congress act, when they couldn't spend money they don't have, right? You want to do an infrastructure bill for $2 trillion, but you don't have the money to do it. Well, if you have a fiat system where you can print the money, you can get away with that. How do you do that if you're locked down by having to have gold and silver? So that is the problem. The other problem I see is what it would do to the price of gold and silver. They would just skyrocket. My goodness, people would be, seeing huge returns on anything.
What potentially in your mind, what kind of numbers would you get to gold and silver if that occurred? Like what per ounce?
Well, it's funny because over the years, people have played out that math and said, well, what if you just took all the dollars in print, divided it by what we believe to be the supply of gold that's been mined, knowing that we might still mine more in the future. The estimates have put gold at $50,000 an ounce.
Oh my God.
So I don't think that's going to be something that the world would be able to do.
Let's do it.
Let's do it, yeah. So for those reasons, as much as I am a fan of the idea that we should go back to a gold and silver standard, from a standpoint of reality, I don't see it likely that we ever could achieve it, because I just don't see how we could possibly sustain the impact of that control. And I don't think the government would ever accept it, because I think they know enough to know that they couldn't survive if we forced them to have to deal in reality.
That would put silver at like what, 5-10K an ounce?
Oh yeah, easily $5,000 an ounce.
Hey,
sure.
I'm okay with being a new millionaire.
Me too. I'm good.
That's it.
More power to it.
That's crazy. These gold and silver coins, numismatic coins. I've been promoting this since listening to you and Andy for so long, and it made sense to me why you would go with that, because the value of the coin itself. I mean, I was looking through some coins the other day, not buying any, but looking through them going, that's incredible how an old coin that, only has that amount of silver or gold in it, but is worth that much more. And, I kind of liken it to trading cards, even though it's not trading cards, is the fact that trading card is a piece of paper. It costs you, 10 cents to make, 5 cents to make. It's paper, right? Little color on it, little ink. But the value that it holds because of where it came from, who touched it. I mean, it really is a fascinating world you have.
Well, it's a supply and demand world, right? So, what makes a Honus Wagner baseball card worth the money it's worth is because you can't make any more of them.
Honus Wagner.
Handful of them that were made exist. High quality examples are going to carry huge prices. And that is appropriate, because supply and demand, it functions well in a lot of worlds. I mean, I remember when we first started in this industry, they told us we would never see a coin that would get to $1 million as a price for a single coin. Well, there are now 250 coins that have cracked the $1 million barrier.
Wow.
There are silver dollars that are worth $10 million. Not because they have $10 million worth of silver in them, but so ridiculously rare and scarce that they carry that kind of price premium. So, rarity is definitely something. And, it's really interesting. I've watched over the years some of the coins that we used to be able to get irregularly and how their values have gotten so high now. And now they're just impossible to even get, that I don't even bother looking for them anymore. So Supply and demand is a powerful thing.
How are you doing on supply at your place? Is it still, is it getting harder to get stuff?
It has been very haphazard. Every other day, not only are we getting price changes on an almost daily basis now, which has been really interesting to try to keep up with, but one day I can't get half dollars. One day I can't get quarters. One day the gold coins are not available. Everything settles down, but there are these gaps that just keep coming through the market that I just am not able to stay ahead of the curve. We are barely keeping up with the supply demand characteristics of our inventory and demand. And it's great because it's helping drive the market's values and prices. But it has been tricky. I used to be able to buy months in advance of inventory and sit on it, and it would be not a problem. But now I can't keep inventory in stock. Every time I get ahead of the curve, within a couple of days, it's like, oh, well, I had a whole bunch of these. Well, they're gone. Okay, we're back out there looking for more inventory. So it's been a little tricky, but we have been lucky in that over all of the years I've been in this, I have been able to develop a number of very, very good resources to continually provide me with inventory. And it has been important. I've had to tap into, secondary, tertiary resources just to continually get inventory. So it's okay. It's tricky. I'm not going ahead too far to say I'm happy with the way things are, because at any given moment, I may have to say, I'm sorry, we're out of those for now, but we're managing, and that's okay.
Nice. It's I've been getting I have my junk silver back here on the table, my pre-64s, my 10-pound bag from Fred back there that I could if it floods, I can keep the waters out, but also if everybody goes broke, I'll be okay. Those are really popular. I just had a woman tell me the other day, Fred, that she's looking and she has a lot of coins at home, not coins that are numismatic necessarily, but she just started looking through her change, and she goes, people really need to just look through their change. She found 10 different coins looking through a bag of change at her house that she found pre-64. She goes, some of it's right in front of you, you just don't even know it.
Yeah, it would have to be, something that she's had for quite a while.
Yeah.
You're not going to find a lot of change anymore
in circulation.
I mean, in circulation, I used to have, a couple local people who would run out of some of the local obscure banks, small little regional banks that were off the beaten path around here. And, they'd go in with $500 or $1,000 and just ask for $50. And the bank would give them rolls of $50, and they'd go through them, and sure enough, they might find a couple of 40% silver halves or an occasional 90% silver half. But over the years, that began to happen, started happening less and less. So if you have old change you've had for quite a while, you might have a better shot of coming across stuff. But, in the modern day, much of this stuff has been screened out because it's sort of easy to spot the silver coins. They have a little different appearance. The color is a little different. They definitely sound different if you clank them around, and then people spot it, so they tend to find it more frequently these days. But yeah, I mean, look, if you're fortunate enough to stumble across a bag of silver coins you've had lying around, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Fred is at uscoincapital.com. You'll see right underneath his little frame there is his website, uscoincapital.com. I don't know if he sees that necessarily, but I have it up on the slide. What is the phone number people can get a hold of you at, Fred?
Yeah, 800-878-COIN, which is 800-878-2646. I just sort of glanced at some of the posts that are scrolling. Somebody said, if you invest with Fred, make sure you get yourself a good box cutter.
Fred literally sends Fort Knox to you.
Yeah, so anybody who's gotten any of our packages will understand the reference. We ship discreetly, and a lot of people have said, they really had to work to get into the boxes we ship, and that is done for a good reason. But yeah, that was kind of funny.
Absolutely. No, it's great stuff. Fred and Donna are both there. How many staff do you have now?
We've got 4 or 5 people working, some part-time, some full-time. So we've got a good staff of people here to help. And again, feel free to call. Everybody who works here is well educated on the markets and will gladly help guide people, how to do this properly, what kind of money makes sense to spend, the best kind of gold or silver coins to buy. We're a big fan of the educational side of this, obviously, as you can see that. And, if they go to our US Coin Capital website and hit the little Facebook link, there are a whole bunch of these podcasts that we try to put up for the past few years so that people can kind of get, the overall environment locked down a little bit more mentally and understand the nature of it. But feel free to call us. We'll take as much time as they need to answer what questions they have and help guide people on how to properly accumulate gold and silver coins.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, too. When you give Fred a call, and what's that number one more time, Fred? Somebody asked.
800-878-2646.
Beautiful. So when you call Fred, you're not going to just get some guy that's like, hey, buy this, buy this, buy this. They take time. They go over. They want to know, like, what are you doing? What kind of money do you want to invest? Because there's different things to do. Whether someone has $1,000 or $50,000 or more, very different investment situations, and wanting to find out, like, what are you looking at long term, this and that. Because as I said before, Fred, this is not one of those things where you're buying it to turn it back in a month later from now. This is a long term situation.
Exactly. And again, look, I've been at this 38 years. Obviously, I'm not a short-term player. But as I said, even things that are happening currently, which is, I'm not arguing with the idea that it's encouraging a lot of people to jump into the market. But I think coming in because of what's happening, for example, this week in Russia, because you think it's going to have a huge impact this week on gold and silver, is not the way to approach this. The idea would be to recognize that this is one of many events. And I have said this earlier before this situation evolved in Russia, to watch out for these exogenous events that just might end up kicking the economy one way or the other. We can't foresee them. Just like the pandemic was something we didn't even talk about before it occurred. How could we? We didn't know that was going to happen, yet it became one of the biggest drivers to the economy for 2 years. So these situations, they come and go, but the one thing that's consistent is that we keep printing money, we keep printing money, we keep printing money. And every time we print more money, it's all unbacked. So all we're doing is simply adding to this pile of existing money, and we're diluting the value for those people holding that form of currency. The counter to that, the counterbalance to that, is the physical accumulation of gold and silver coins. So I would encourage people to give us a call, and if you haven't started the process, get going. If you have, add to your pile.
Yeah, and for anybody out there who's looking at like, oh, how much does it cost? Do me a favor. Even if you only have a little bit of money, give Fred a call. He can look at your situation individually and say, hey, this is a good idea. This is not a good idea. It's not necessarily about minimums, maximums. It's about, okay, what are you looking to do? Because sure, it may be getting one coin, it may be getting more. I look at Fred not as a guy who sells me coins. Fred actually is a guy who I'm like, hey, this is what I have right now. This is what I want to do with it. What do you think strategies are wise? He's not a financial advisor, but he definitely is an advocate for me, and he kind of points me in the right direction sometimes. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and except for the fact, as a company, we have about $1,000 minimum order, only because logistically it's hard to do anything less than that. Other than that, again, it's a wide open market. And a lot of people I've worked with have been doing this for decades, and they just accumulate here and there as they're able to. And I think that's the smart play.
Absolutely. Hey, Fred, I thank you for coming back, my man.
Always a pleasure. Glad we got the technology worked out.
100%. We'll get this video over to you, and maybe we'll have you back in a couple of weeks. I'd love to chat again and get some people's information, get them educated. That's the key to everything.
Anytime.
So for Fred, this is Dr. Dean, BraveTV. Go check him out at US Coin Capital. That's CAPITOL.com. And as always, love, help, serve. And hey, let's get our money straight. You guys have a great day. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.